back. This is just great. Happy to talk to you.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm curious. The thing front of mind for me this week was panic and wanting to understand panic better. And I've been reading your work for several years on anxiety and panic, and know that this is something that's actually pretty closely tied to your own story. There are a few people alive that are more of an expert on panic, perhaps, than you, both clinically and maybe with some of your own personal needs. So, you open to talking about that?
Sure, sure. Let's dive
Yeah.
into hell on purpose.
Yeah. Why did you get interested in studying panic?
Well, that was kind of visited upon me by the fact that I developed a panic disorder.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's a really interesting and fascinating phenomenon. And for people who've never sort of explored that territory, it's one of those ones where when you see it, you can't unsee it, and you are now permanently different because most folks go around through life thinking that, you're not going to get so emotionally overwhelmed suddenly in a situation that you can't talk, you can't think, you can't function. It could happen anywhere. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it can come from 0 to 60 in 30 seconds or less. So just imagine, people who are listening, if you're driving or you're having a meal at home or you're on a podcast, what would the world look like if you knew, and you could never unlearn this because once it's happened, it's in your memory forever, that within 60 seconds you couldn't function? That's an interesting challenge. And it really opens the doors to some important areas of growth or insights or whatever. And it's been a blessing for me. I mean, my 3-year descent into hell, I wouldn't have called a blessing. And the many years that I've worked on it. I think my last panic attack was 20 years ago or something, but it was a good
Mm-hmm.
15, 20 years into the work that I'm doing now. And I've learned never to say never. So I'm in here right now, knowing
Mm-hmm.
100% that in the next 60 seconds, I can get to the point where I can't function. That's possible.
Yeah, there's the double fear of the actual terror of going through it, and then there's the terror that it could happen again at any moment, and you're just vulnerable.
Yeah, and those two things are fit together because in the initial panic attacks can come for all kinds of reasons. But even in that course, in that not 60 seconds or 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it took to sort of first have the tornado happen in your head, this kind of mental tornado, you did things. And when you unpack it, you realize, and you slow it down, you realize, okay, it wasn't just done to me. No, I did some
Mm-hmm.
things. And those things turns out to be relevant to everybody, whether
Yeah,
you got panic or
yeah.
not.
Well, did you know that you were having a panic attack the first time it happened to you? What was that
Oh
discovery
yeah.
process like?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
My first panic attack was in a department meeting, where, as I say, there's a TEDx talk where I walk through this. Uh, I was watching full professors fight in a way that only wild animals and full professors are capable of. I'm an untenured assistant professor, and they're just ripping each other up one side, down the other. I mean, everything
Mm-hmm.
other than physical violence. But I mean, the actual, even if the words didn't sound like what they were, I mean, anybody who knew the culture and knew what was going on knew that this was all out war that you were watching. And I raised my hand and I just wanted to ask them to stop, that this is not going to produce a healthy department. And part of me is thinking, like, geez, this is a department of psychology. Come on. Don't you have any sense of shame doing to each other? What is this? I mean,
Yeah.
out of the blue, here comes, oh, I'm really feeling anxious. I wonder if I can actually speak here. If they call on me, and then 20 seconds later, my heart's going 180 beats a minute. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I'm going to pass out. And then they finally do call on me. And I open my mouth, and absolutely no sound came out. It was impossible to get sound out. I was like gasping for breath. And it went on like an eternity. I'm sure from the outside it was 30 seconds or something, but from the inside it was an eternity where I'm just kind of there like some sort of goldfish out of water with my mouth going, mom, but no sounds coming out.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm an untenured assistant professor humiliating myself in front of a room full of colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, they just went on. They never said, "What's going on with you?" or "Is something wrong?" No.
They just kept talking. They
They
just
just
moved along.
waited, and then they started fighting again.
Huh.
And finally, the end meeting, and I was way away from the door. I was as far away as you could get. So I'm there now with wave after wave after wave for like half an hour. And finally, the meeting ends, and I kind of slink out of the meeting, like almost clinging to the side of the wall, trying to hold myself up. And a 3-year journey into a place where eventually, there was very, very few things that I could do. I couldn't take a phone call, couldn't take a trip. I didn't want to get in the car, didn't want to get in an elevator. I didn't want to give a class. If I did give a class, I would sometimes be unable to even give a lecture. I'd try to show films, but then my hands would shake so bad I could hardly get the films in sprockets. It's this old. It was actually film in sprockets. People probably don't know what that means anymore. But there used to be these physical things called films, and they were on reels. And there was sprockets, and then you had like this thing called a projector. And then anyway,
No idea what you're talking about.
you don't know. I know it's another era. So it gradually just started taking away my life, just bite after bite after bite. But I presenting it as if it's passive. Take it away. No, I wasn't that. I was feeding a tiger. It's like a tiger in the corner of the room. Like, here's a chunk of meat. Here's a chunk of meat. I won't go to that meeting. I won't accept that invitation to give that talk. I won't, take that trip. I won't travel. I won't leave the house. I won't, chunk after chunk after chunk. And eventually, I'd wake up in the middle of the night in full-blown panic attacks, unable to breathe. So it would even take away my sleep. Like, there was no place that was safe. Because everywhere you go, there you are. And what I was running from was inside me.
Wow.
That's kind of weird, isn't it? If you haven't been in that space, you can't even imagine it. You cannot imagine it. But it turns out it's really close. I mean, it's close to things that happen to all of us. The processes that feed it, everybody knows about. And when you learn how to unpack it, those processes are relevant to almost everybody. And I can say that with certainty because now, 41 years later, we've done the 1,000 randomized trials and the meta-analyses and all that. And what happened in my journey, what I learned in that is relevant to everybody who's listening. I'm sorry if it sounds arrogant, but I know as a statistical fact, as a scientific fact, that it is.
Well, I sensed that immediately because especially right out of school, I spent a lot of time reading your work in relational frame theory, and there's the function of behavior was something that really fascinated me, that you essentially could overlay the same pattern of behavior in different contexts, and there's similar results, similar relationships between symbols. And so, for example, I noticed when I started doing couples work that people would avoid conflict with their partner in a lot of the same ways as what you're describing and avoiding things that could trigger a panic attack. And it's like, I can't talk to him about this because if I talk to him about this, he'll get mad. And if he gets mad, then he'll start drinking. And so like you're saying, the tiger that comes and takes a bite out of every tiny little thing, it's like, okay, you start segmenting off this whole domain of your relationship, this whole domain of your experience, this whole domain of your interests, because you're worried it's going to frustrate them, or they're going to reject you, or you're going to try to like make a bid for their interest, and they're going to roll their eyes and look at you and just in disgust. And so it starts to feel more and more cramped and more small. And like you said, there you are just laying in your bed and you realize it's still in you. It's like there's nothing left to avoid in the relationship, and then it starts to kind of just crumble. That pattern seems to overlay.
Well, that piece you're talking about of avoiding your own emotions and experiences is probably the single most toxic thing that human beings can do. Not in every situation. First responders, so forth, need to learn. We didn't know this when we started this journey, but it's turned out to be true. When they're actually in the ambulance and they're going to arrive and people will be on the street and some of them will die and some won't, and you have to triage, and you're looking at horrific scenes that will, like nightmares out of your dreams of, people who are literally bodies are spread across the street and so forth. This is not the time to cry. This is not the time to feel. This is a time to make hard decisions and do your best medically to save those that you can.
Yeah.
And so there are special circumstances, and we put the harsh ones of war and things like that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So it's
War.
not always, and it's not everywhere. But even that person, if they go home and then the memories have no place to go, well, this is why you see in people who have jobs like that, alcoholism and drug problems, you see spousal violence, you see what happens when you run from emotions everywhere. So you better learn how, even if you're in these difficult situations where sometimes you just can't, you can't afford it in this moment. Still need to learn how to create a space where you get to feel, remember, think, sense what you feel, remember, think, and sense. Because there's no delete button in your nervous system, no healthy subtract function in this little computer called your brain, other than brain injury, and that's not something to pray for. So you better learn how to carry it, because otherwise it's going to simply dictate to you where you have to go. It's going to demand those chunks of meat, and the meat you're throwing at it are chunks of your life and your freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you were deep in the hell of panic disorder, noticing that it's taking bigger chunks out of your life, you're laying in bed realizing there's nowhere else that I can avoid. There's nothing else that I can just try to not come in contact with. It's in me. What was the journey from that point? What did you do?
Well, you're running down now about a 3-year long string. Some people make it even longer, but it was really common. You get a whole bunch of folks together with panic disorder, and they tell their stories, and it's the same story. You basically try to compromise with the beast. You basically try to make a deal.
Yeah, make bargains.
Make bargains. Yeah. I won't do this, I won't do this, I won't do this. But of course, this is in you, and your mind knows the trick. I mean, I just want you to think about it. No, because now you're thinking about it, not thinking about it, which means you're thinking about it. It's not logical, but it's psychological. That's how the mind works. If I were to say to you something like, it's opposite day, say what comes to mind. Good.
Bad.
Yeah, of course. Black.
White.
Relaxed.
Tense, anxious.
Yeah, exactly. So now let's say you're going to try to just think about being relaxed. You got your relaxation tapes. You know how to do them. You have got images of being lying by the beach. You got to, well, and why are you doing this? So that you don't think about that. What? That thing. I don't want that, because I know where that leads. If I think about that, my heart's going to start jumping. If my heart starts jumping, I'm going to focus on it. If I focus on it, it's going to jump even more. If I want this is it's
all connected.
It's all connected. So you get in a situation, let's say, and you notice, hey, I'm feeling pretty good. Oh my God. You just plugged yourself into the wall socket.
Yeah.
So there's no place to go that's safe, because all roads lead to Rome, because the way the mind works, any relation is a relation. So a relation of different, opposite is not. Any relation is a relation. So how are you going to keep from going somewhere where anything that you think can be related to that place you don't want to go? Yeah. Literally any thought. Give me a thought and I can tell you how it leads to panic. Relax can lead to panic. I used to have panic attacks if I heard the word relaxation. Well, the answer is there isn't any place you can go. This is why suicides happen inside panic disorder, because people literally see no way out. And so you ask the question of what did it take? For me, it took running out that string until I had no way out. And I described this in the TEDx talk of sitting on a brown and gold shag carpet, or maybe it was green. Anyway, sitting on a shag carpet at 2:30 in the morning, thinking I'm having a panic attack and a heart attack, and I need to call the ambulance. And then realizing in kind of a fugue state with an out-of-body experience, kind of almost you'd say a spiritual experience, but not in the sweet, flowery way that you'd think of. But that, no, I wasn't having a heart attack. That's just another form of panic attack. It's just a weirder one that includes shooting pains down your arm, and pain, a weight on your chest, and all those symptoms of a heart attack that you're manufacturing because you can do it. And then realizing, okay, what that means is I can't even go to sleep. I can't trust my own body. And yeah, I know I can't give lectures. I can't get in front of people. I can't. Well, where can I go? And the answer is nowhere. Nowhere. And I don't know how long I sat in that state. I show in a TEDx talk of, I know when I sort of had this transformational spiritual kind of awakening, when I stood up, the tracks of tears on my face were dried and burned. So if you ever had that happen where you cried a lot and then you just stay
They
there
dry.
long enough that they dry, and then they have like a burning sensation of, I don't know, from the salt or something. I don't know why that's like that, but I guess that's probably half an hour or 45 minutes of sitting inside the nothing of there is no way out. And then catching the voice that had been dominating me in my head. There was a voice in there that was telling me what to do. And I don't mean a hallucination. I just mean my thoughts were telling me to do these logical, reasonable, sensible, pathological things of running, fighting, and hiding. And somewhere in there, I said no. There were actually words that I said out loud, which I repeat there, which is I say to the voice within, I don't know who you are, but apparently you can make me hurt and you can make me suffer. But I'll tell you one thing you can't do. And here I'm actually pounding my chest. You can't make me turn from my own experience. You can't do it. And then my life does a 180. I don't mean it does a 180 like flowers opened up and then the panic attack stopped. No, it's like
It was a different direction.
I am not going to run from me. And I stood up literally inside a sworn oath. I am not going to run from me. And that was a completely different world, from where I was sitting cross-legged trying to deal with whether I should call the ambulance.
Because that was the only strategy you had was avoidance. Just get away, get away, get away. And then there was this moment of like, I'm done running.
Yeah, get away, rationalize, explain, compromise, throw the bits of meat to the tiger. All the 101 ways that you get away, make a deal, manage. And that string had run out. And what I hit, you could say, was the moment where I realized the task is not to get out. The task is to get in. And that you could actually. Now, why did that come to me? I think some of it has to do with psychology training. It has to do with all those hippy dippy things. It has to do with psychedelics and my history with that. It has to do with the human potential movement. It has to do with all the stuff I was doing in the 60s and 70s, but it also has to do just with, well, actually, I've realized it has to do with things that went all the way back when I was a little kid. I told the story of, I was a really little kid of being tortured by dinosaurs in my dreams.
No, I don't know this story. I haven't heard you say
Okay, well, two big repeated monsters, nightmares I had as a kid was one gigantic robot monster with a huge eye that would chase me. Another was dinosaurs. Well, the dinosaur ones, I would dream that they would come and they would try to find me in the house. And if you looked at a window, there'd be like a gigantic, Tyrannosaurus Rex eye looking in there, and then you'd go to another room in the dream. And sooner or later, they'd find that one, and finally you just can't stand it anymore. And you run outside the house and you run away. But then you get into one of these running dreams. I'm sure you must have had running dreams where no matter how hard you run, it's not fast enough. And you're being chased by the demons or whatever. I was being chased by dinosaurs. And I'd turn this way and fast. I'd do all the things of fancy footwork and so forth. And it's getting closer and closer. And eventually it would catch up with me and eat me. And then I'd wake up. Well, somewhere in this repeated nightmares, as a little kid, I have a lucid form of that dream where I'm aware that I'm dreaming, but I'm still running like hell to get away from the dinosaur. And I remember when it catches me, I'm going to wake up, and I kind of would rather wake up than doing this dream. So I stopped, dead stopped, turned, and ran right at the Tyrannosaurus Rex and leaped in its mouth and woke up. And then I did it the next night.
Yeah.
And then the next night. And then the dinosaurs stopped coming to play. They didn't like this game. They liked the one where they got to chase me down and eat me. If I ran towards them and jumped in their mouth, they didn't like that. That was no fun. And the dreams.
What a wonderful intuition of a young kid.
Yeah, isn't it kind of an odd? I bet you people listening to me have had things like that, where
Mm-hmm.
you just hit on the kind of illogical but kind of logical solution. Maybe you don't need a way out, you need a way in.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes back to mind because I think this transformational moment, my night on the carpet, as I say, had that quality of I'm not going to run from me, and realizing, you can't make me run from my own experience. What that is a commitment to move in instead of out. I'm going to move into the painful experience and just see what's there. I'm going to jump into the mouth of the dinosaur. Eat me if you can. I ain't running.
So what was that like when you jumped in?
Well, in the initial night, it was transformational. When I stood up, I knew my life was different. I mean, I remember walking over. It was by now probably 3 or 3:30 in the morning. I know it started somewhere around 2 or 2:30 because I glanced at the clock as my hand was reaching out for the phone and then coming back and reaching out for the phone and coming back when I'm trying to decide if I'm going to call for the ambulance. And I remember looking out on a parking lot that was behind this apartment, which turns out was an apartment that my girlfriend had at the time, but she wasn't there, and I don't know why. And I went on a search to try to find this place. Like, did I make it up when I actually wrote A Liberated Mind? And I wrote letters to every girlfriend, every past friend, trying to figure out. And I finally found it. I drove the map and said, yeah, that's my house. That's exactly my house. My former girlfriend, which just brought tears to my eyes because, 30 years later, did I make it up? When it was this real? It was so otherworldly. But anyway, I walked to the back window and I looked out over the parking lot, and it would be kind of like if suddenly tonight there was some incredible sunset that opened up and you sort of saw the sky in a way that you'd never seen it before, or it just lit up in a way that dark parking lot looked transformationally different. I can't even tell you what it was. It wasn't a visual difference. It was just like,
You perceived it in a different way.
yeah. And if I had to put it into words, it was something like, I belong here. It was something like that. It's okay to be me and I belong here. Because inside panic, and people listening to me, I bet you inside your addiction struggle, your depression struggle, whatever the thing is, or your abuse history or your trauma history or something, there's this sense almost like you're an alien, like you don't belong, like this life is not the legitimate valid life. This is some other life. This is the tortured life, the suffering life, the other life, the weirdo life, you're the exception, you're different. Inside that, looking out on a dark parking lot was, I belong here and my experience is not my enemy. And it's not like those words came into my head. I'm just trying to characterize
this
what a
overwhelming emotion. This
yeah. Yeah, it was.
Well,
Just the
I wonder what
context
that
was different.
looks like.
It's a different context so profoundly
Yeah.
that is something as ordinary as a dark parking lot really looked different.
Well, I wonder what some of those steps looked like practically and what you went on to, I don't know, create for people to be able to arrive at a similar place. What moving in instead of trying to get out is that some sort of like just giving up to the sensations that are happening? I don't know, open that up for me a little bit more. What does that look like practically?
Yeah, and I asked those questions really, really quickly because I'm still functioning as a psychotherapist, and oddly,
Yeah, right.
guess who's coming to see me? Mostly people with panic and anxiety disorder. And a lot of what's inside the early work, I remember these clients so well. A lot of these metaphors, a lot of these exercises were things my clients made up. Because when I tried to convey, and it was initially hard, I didn't know how to bring this into people's lives, but I knew it was important and I had to figure out a way. They gave me the way, because as I began to move in and open the space up, they started moving in ways that were really atypical. It was the kind of thing you would occasionally see in traditional behavior therapy or cognitive behavior therapy, but it now happened with a regularity and with a speed to it. There was like transformational things happening where people really pivoting, doing a 180, So, but that came just by things like, well, what does that feel like? Can we go into that? Tell me what you see. What do you notice? Notice who's noticing. Of catching this more because in the night on the carpet thing, I have this out of body experience where I'm looking back at myself, uh, as if consciousness is something that can be moved around by time, place, and person, as if you can go to another side of the room and look back at yourself, which is now a classic ACT exercise.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
easy to do.
I use it a lot.
And as soon as you do it, I mean, I'm not going to take the time here, but as soon as you do it, if somebody's struggling with something, and if they have a sense of leaving their body and looking back at themselves and really spending some time to look at yourself and how do you feel about yourself and do you love yourself, and then going to the side of the room and doing the same thing, and then going to a wiser future and doing the same thing. So you mess around with person as if you're two persons, place here and there, and time. Why? Well, because the I, here, nowness of awareness, this witnessing, noticing sense of self is, I think, this more spiritual part of us from which it's possible to look at the hell of your own history without closing your eyes and to find a place in which it's truly okay, not as a judgment, but the way we sometimes mean okay, not okay versus not okay, but okay when, like, Roger, check, got it, here, yep. It's something more like present. Sometimes we use okay that way. And some of these cheesy things of books, I'm okay, you're okay. They're pointing to something that's really important, of that, the inherent okayness of consciousness itself.
That was an aha moment for me reading just your work. I learned that one pretty early on, and that's been like really like a pillar of my clinical practice with clients, and it's something that never ceases to surprise me, and I'm always learning new pieces when I bring that idea up. Because, for example, like maybe we're exploring a traumatic past, and the self-criticism really starts to become pervasive. Maybe even it oscillates into self-hatred. And then a simple question like, I just want you to take a step back, and I just want you to imagine for a moment, like a part of you just walks into the room and sees you and I just sitting here. Read the body language of the woman sitting on the couch. What does she look like to you?
Yeah.
It pulls you out of almost this tunnel visioned, I don't know, self-torment in a lot of spaces. And it can be the bedrock that for some people can really create some warmth and almost some compassion, and it gets you in touch with the sadness that might be animating the self-criticism.
Yeah.
Without me needing to like explain that to you, without me needing to teach or be like, listen, what's really underneath your self-hatred is a lot of sadness. I don't need to say that. It'll rise up in the room without me needing to provoke it or suggest it, just by simply shifting perspective. Another one that I'll use often is someone's being really self-critical towards themselves, really frustrated, like, oh, I'm just this piece of garbage. And I'm just like, I want you to imagine for a moment that maybe they have a younger sister, that your younger sister who experienced some of the same things, let's say that they experienced it just like you did, and they went through a lot of these circumstances. Let's say you switched places and she was talking about herself that way. What would be your response? What's your reaction to hearing your sister say that about herself? And I'm not even suggesting that, isn't that so rude of you to say that about yourself? Like, would you say that about your sister? Nothing like that. Just a neutral question. And it's like a part of them immediately sobers up to the self-criticism. I don't need to argue with them. I don't need to say, oh, that's a little unrealistic, or you're kind of like, exaggerating there. It's like they actually have all that insight and intuition and wisdom already programmed in, just with a subtle shift of perspective. It was illuminating to be able to notice that shift of shifting your time, place, person, and the insight that can come.
It happens so fast, and you're in, these ways that you're expressing, or your way, and they're a little different than other clinicians, but they're tapping into the process of person, place, and time. And as these features of perspective, which taps into this more witnessing, noticing, spiritual sense of self, which begins even before human language, I believe, because we're such social primates, taking perspective as part of our birthright, but is built out by language and these relations of I and you and here and there and now and then that you learn, and then you show up around age 3, and from that moment forward, that kind of consciousness is this dimensionless strand on which the beads of experience are placed, and it's why you can remember and story about put together, but when you tap into the strand instead of the story, you find that there's a part of you that's quite open by nature, that is non-judgmental by nature,
Yeah.
that will allow you to risk and to yearn and to care and to do things that are hard without fear dominating you by its nature. And it's really, really cool to be able to tap into it. I think the mindfulness traditions do it, wisdom traditions do it, depth-oriented psychotherapy do it, transformational experiences do it. I mean, if you look at the transformational spiritual moments in people, you used to believe, and I was a Maslow fan early on, that this was something, peak experiences and stuff that only happens to the elite. No, if you ask the question right, 90 some odd percent of the folks have spiritual experiences defined by these unusual senses of unity across time, place, or person. Sometimes just by the looking in the eyes of a loved one, or however it shows up. Sometimes in their religious traditions and during prayer. And well, if you can bring that space in, which you just did with your questions, because you now know a little, and some of this is the RFT stuff, some of this is the stuff that comes out of this. When you know that that's part of how the I hear now-ness awareness comes together, it's really easy to mobilize some of those resources just with questions like the ones you're asking. And people instantly become wiser. And one of the things that means, and I say it to people, you have the knowledge within to move forward. What you need to do is sort of show up and tap into it. And let's see if we can sort of find that. I don't want to, I'm not saying like you have it and you're not using it. I'm not meaning it as a form of criticism. I mean it as a invitation to self-fidelity. With the Latin root of that, fidelity, the root is the same root as the word for faith. It's fides. And when you're with that fides, that's called confidence. Self with fidelity means with fidelity. That's what confidence is.
Wow.
You usually think it's an emotion. No, it's not an emotion. It comes later. It's the faithing that your experience is not your own enemy and that you can sort of walk inside that. So I think another way to say this is we need to mobilize the spiritual part of us to help empower our life's moments so that we get to live the kind of life that's about what we want it to be about. We don't know what the features of it are going to be because, a car could drive through the window this instant, and then the features are about how you're going to deal with an injury or something. But what the storyline is, whether you're writing a tragedy or a hero's journey, that's up to you.
I'm curious. I want to rewind just a little bit because we've embedded an assumption that might not be self-evident to some people. That panic is in some way related to a past traumatic event or an emotion or an experience that you don't want to approach, that it's not just like a bodily sensation. I talk to people pretty frequently who are just like, oh, I just have panic disorder. It's a chemical imbalance in my brain. I need to take medication that stops it. That's just something about my body. And there's not always a connection to, there might be something deeper psychologically happening. What's your response to that domain, that tension?
Well, if you look at just the data on the effect of medications for panic, you can dampen down the frequency of panic attacks, but it doesn't necessarily dampen down the avoidance that goes with it, the life restrictions that go with it. And so if it really is what you just said there, dude, how come, you decided that you weren't going to be the one to seek the promotion? Knowing full well that challenge would be scary as hell, or that you weren't the one who's gonna, ask that girl out or decide this relationship that's really not working. You need to face that and do something about it. Or when I take a broader view, no, I don't need to. It's not necessarily traumatic, whatever. It could be whatever it is. I mean, you get people come by this multiple ways. Give you an example: bad drug trips, illness. Very common sources of panic disorder. Why? Well, all you really need is, be knocked sideways by a COVID infection, let's say, and how awful that feels and weird it feels and all of that. And it'll give you moments where if you did the wrong things and made your own experience your enemy, you could absolutely have a bad illness-driven panic attack. And as I
Yeah.
said before, once you have one, you know that it exists. I mean, the idea that 1 out of 5 people have a mental health problem, oh, please, 5 out of 5 people are challenged mentally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we just get
Ev-
over that weird thing that it's them?
Yeah.
We're supposed to
Yeah.
pity them? Is that really what destigmatizing looks like? That doesn't look like destigmatizing to me. No, this is, and after these 2 years of COVID, does anybody actually believe it's them?
Mm.
I think we
Yeah.
all kind of went, oh my goodness, this might be me.
It's all of us.
Yeah. So, and the door that opened you up in the case of panic to making your own emotions your enemy, you could have come by very easily from a virus or somebody giving you, we're going to have fun taking this drug tonight and actually has strychnine in it or whatever the thing is.
Right. So in cases like that, or I've also known people who have a really bad marijuana trip and then
Yeah.
they get panic after that. The thing that you're zeroing in on is that there's a resistance to experience that underlies the panic. There's a resistance to whatever, maybe that drug, maybe that trip pushed you into a place that really freaked you out or that really overwhelmed you. And your response to that was that rigidity and that resistance. And it's in the tension of that rigidity and that resistance.
Yeah, and I think without training, all of us have that within. So it isn't more like, oh, you're resistant beforehand. No, you may have become resistant in that very moment because you hit a place where you said no. What did you say no to? Your own experience. Okay, well, how did
Wow.
that work? Well, if you say no strongly enough and dramatically enough and with, underlined with exclamation points, um, where does the no turn into the yes? And that's the process of sinking into. Now, not everybody does it. If you ask the questions properly, it turns out there's a lot of people who've had panic that never developed into a panic disorder. Just like there's a lot of people that had really initial, stages of OCD, let's say. That's so common that we even make kind of children's games out of it. Don't step on a crack, you'll break grandmother's back. And I mean, where did that come from? Well, it came from a cognitive structure that is right on that edge.
Yeah. That's fascinating. So there's experiences like panic that comes from a bad trip, but not everyone oscillates into a panic disorder.
Exactly.
And so the underlying psychology of the panic disorder, like you pointed out a few times, is you know that that state of hell exists, and your determination to never reach that pit of hell again actually creates a whole system of psychological compulsions and behavioral systems to avoid, and that
Yeah,
avoidance is
yeah.
actually what pours gas on the
And
fire.
I'm mentioning OCD because it's another common example that almost
Yeah,
everybody
yeah.
taps into. If you've ever been way up there on, let's say, the Statue of Liberty or something like that, or on the edge of the Grand Canyon or something, you notice that you rock. When you get too close to the railing, you rock. Why do you rock? Because you're telling yourself not to lean over so much so that you don't fall, which activates the muscles that move you back. But then you're not fully in tune with that. It's just a natural thing to a thought saying, oh, don't get too close, don't lean over. And so you rock back, but then you sense that you're going back. So of course you have to activate the other muscles and you're in the rock. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
some people think, oh my God, I want to jump. I want to jump. Look, I'm going to fall. I'm going to, and you can walk right into, a real phobia of heights and of, and, maybe I'm secretly suicidal and maybe that,
Mm.
OC kind of thing.
Yeah, same thing with those compulsions. Like, I have a knife. I could just stab someone that
Yeah.
I love. Like why would I stab? I don't want to stab, but maybe I will though. And so then you start avoiding knives. It's the patterns of avoidance that underlie those fears.
Exactly. My mom struggled with this clinically, and she'd wash her hands till it bled and so forth. And I only learned 3 years ago when 23andMe let me know that my mother's sister's son lived about 100 miles away, and I went and visited
Oh.
and learned why. I'll tell that story if you're interested, but it really changed my whole life because I understood my mother so well in my 70s. I finally figured this out. But what is inside that OCD thing of these thoughts that can't be allowed? I'll give you an example. You're driving over a bridge. It's a really, really high bridge. The railing's not very high. It's a beautiful view off to the side. You kind of almost don't look there because you want to control the car. And then you have the thought, I should just pull the wheel and I'd sail off into, like, how many people would have that thought? 70, 80% of the folks. What would happen if
I have, yeah.
you've had that, right? You want to develop panic, OCD? Be really committed to never have that thought. You just plugged yourself into a wall socket. You now have the self-amplifying energy of avoiding the thought, which evokes the thought, which leads to more avoidance and emotional reactions. And there you are. I mean, you can absolutely be on that journey. I've mentioned it because actually after the panic, it's still in the ACT world, but it didn't last very long. I actually developed this kind of obsessive fear that I was going to harm my firstborn son. It's like the knife thing. And I remember being in a Brazilian forest way up top on a big kind of tall hotel that was in the forest, but it was very warm, and so there was no windows. And we were having a meeting there, and all the things were open. And my son was just crawling. And I had this really strong image of what it would be like to fling him like a frisbee across the tops of the trees of the Brazilian forest. And it hitting me so hard, like I was grabbing the chair, like my white knuckle grabbing a chair so that I don't frisbee my baby into the forest. Well, then this is after I'm doing the work on panic. It was like boom, it, and I catch it. It didn't really dig in and develop a whole thing, but I had to walk out what could have been a real full-blown OCD thing. Absolutely could have been. And it lasted around for a few weeks. I mean, it hit me so hard before I caught what I was doing that it was like tormenting me just later on. And so our capacity cognitively to create worlds that have never been, that are fearsome and frightening, and thereby actually create that world, which of course then confirms the story. Look, I actually did want to jump off or I actually was going to do this horrible thing, or I actually had that panic attack to the point I could not make sound come out of my mouth. I could not. That's real. And people were like passed out on the freeway. That's real. People in a panic attack will pass out.
Yeah.
How are you going to drive? Well, you're going to do it by learning this thing that your mind doesn't give you an easy way to learn, which is to ride these emotional waves and respectfully decline your mind's invitation to go down into that part of the network that, yes, can actually remove your ability for your body to function. Your body can shut down. All those things can happen. I had a client of mine who was just a very successful panic disorder client. And he said, when I came to see you, I thought, boy, it is just not safe for me to feel this and this and this and this. And he's walking through all the things he's experienced. This is a very successful client. If I can, a 30-second example, that towards the end, where he was doing self-imposed graduation exercises, he took a Caribbean cruise. He'd never he almost left his house in like a decade. Took a Caribbean cruise. A storm comes up, and he says, I'm going to do it. And he runs to the front. Do not do this at home. I don't suggest this, but it was brilliant. He went to the forward thing of this cruise ship, not a huge one that doesn't get affected by, and a big storm's coming up. And he wraps his arms around the struts on the railing, like something out of the movie The Titanic. And the storm passes through, and he goes, like you
just screaming. This courageous yelp.
Like, I'm not running from anything.
Yeah.
Well, but to finish the story, he said, I used to think that I had to run away. It was life-threatening if I didn't. And now I know that deep in my bones that it's life-threatening if I do. Or something more like life-crushing. It wasn't threatening, life-crushing if I do. So what would it be like if you respectfully declined your mind's invitation to live inside a cage, to live inside a box, to say no to experience, to say no to relationships, to say no to opportunities, to live life small? What would happen? Not to drive yourself to be big and grand. That's another version of the same sick thing. I'm talking about, what would it be like if it was okay to be you? That might be interesting.
Something that resonates in my own story is not knowing that I actually could survive the terrible things I was trying to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this invitation that I give clients sometimes when there's the right rapport. Sometimes it's not always appropriate to say it this direct, but I'm just like, I think, yeah, the pain is probably really terrifying. You're right. I think you could survive it. And I think you're strong. You have this strength. You have this wisdom. You have this capacity to hold this thing. And it feels like it'll swallow you up. It feels like if I give it just an inch, it will pull me down into this bottomless pit where I'm in that hell forever. That's the fear. If I let it have just an inch of ground, then I lose myself.
Exactly.
I lose everything that I care about, and then I'm gone.
And so could you face that moment and open up in that with faith, that fidelity, self-fidelity place where it's okay to be used so thoroughly that you can even have that scary thought, and you don't have to go like, no, it's not a fight. You don't have to fight this thing. You do the strength that comes from being your whole self and the peace of mind that comes from that, the confidence, even the emotion that generally, if you keep doing it for years, eventually comes, it shows up, but that's not the engine. That's the exhaust. The engine is that leap of faith, that fides, faith move, that fidelity move. And then when you just decline the mind's invitation to turn yourself into a kind of a broken thing where parts have to be removed before what's left behind is okay, where it's like, no, all of me, all of my history, all of my memories, all of my moments belong. And I'm walking all of that in a new direction. That is a place in the physical world, you would say, how do you know that you're really working on yourself as a physical being? You'd say, well, how about I'm strong?